Bluegrass, we're inspired by you. Full of hope, full of purpose, rising, moving forward together. And the days ahead are bright. The enhancement and well-being of our community, transforming lives through mental health, intellectual and developmental disability, and substance use services. Bluegrass.org is becoming New Vista, because with every sunrise, we reflect upon something greater. We see the good ahead. New Vista.
Here we are. So this is good. So my name's David Hanna, and I'm a psychologist, as you were told, and I'm really glad to be here. This is the first conference event I've attended since COVID, and I'm glad to be here. I have always enjoyed this conference so much, and this is the first time I've had the opportunity to present here, and really appreciate that opportunity. So I want to talk to you today about peer support supervision and what is needed for peer support supervision. Although I currently work for Passport Health Plan by Molina Healthcare, and one of the things that distinguishes us is we actually have a peer support program within a Medicaid managed care company. And that's kind of unusual. I suspect most of you are familiar with peers working in community settings where they're doing work with people who are on their own journey of recovery. And that's what our peers do, but we do it within a health insurance company. And I want to tell you today about an experience. I've worked with peers since, like I said, the mid-1990s. So, 20, maybe 30 years, when peer support was a very new thing. But in the mid-1990s, I went to a conference and there was a presentation by a person who was going to talk about the reality of recovery. And that was sort of a new concept to me at the time. And I went to this presentation. There was a wonderful, very professional presentation, well organized by the woman who was presenting. And as she went on with her presentation, she talked about her own experience with psychosis, with involuntary commitment, with being so angry and confused that she was fighting with people, and of her experience of having to be put in restraints because she was dangerous. And then she went on to describe how that she had begun her own recovery journey, and that with treatment involving medication and involving behavioral health services and spirituality, she had been able to take control of her own life. And that talk, and I don't remember the person who gave it, but that talk really changed my life, because for the first time, I saw that recovery, I should not be content with saying to people that you should just follow the doctor's orders, but that people really needed to enter into recovery, and that peers and people with lived experience were a vital part of the experience of helping people achieve a better life. And in the years that have followed, I've been privileged to get to know many people who have walked that journey and used that experience to make the world a better place. I've worked alongside peers. I've provided clinical supervision to peers. And as I said earlier, for this past year, I've had the privilege of helping develop peer support within a managed care health plan. Often when people talk about peer support services, there's a lot of focus on the peer, which makes perfect sense. What do peers do? What kinds of training do they need? What are appropriate boundaries for peers, and so on? And those are all very important questions, and they deserve attention. But today I want to focus on supervision, and especially the multiple and sometimes conflicting roles that supervisors within large organizations play. And let me show you my next slide here. Everybody can read that just fine, right? So what this is the regulatory requirements for peer support specialists that come out of Kentucky law. And I had to make the print that small to get them all on one slide. And this covers things like what kind of training is needed, what kind of activities do peers do, what are the requirements for being a peer support specialist. Now, the reg also contains some things about supervision. Let me show you that slide. So you can get everything it says about supervision on a slide like this, where it's, you know, much bigger print, much less words. And basically it says that the supervising professional and the adult peer support specialist, they have to meet face-to-face at least twice a month for half an hour. And there has to be a written record of the supervision, including the topics discussed and specific actions to be taken and so on. All of which is to say that the requirements for peer support supervision are not as well fleshed out as they are for the delivery of peer support services. And so this afternoon, I want to try to share some of the things that I've learned about supervising peer support services and how you can balance what are the different roles that a supervisor has, and then how to balance those within the work of doing peer support work. And I want to talk about this. You can't see the very top of the slide there, but it says 3 expectations for peer support supervision. And we're going to talk about this from a mission standpoint. That is, what is the mission of peer support services? The mission is to be able to help people experience recovery. And then there is a corporate or agency mission. And we'll talk about that, because part of the supervisor's job is to help the service meet corporate or agency goals. And then finally, there is a part of supervision that is directly related to the personal recovery journey of the peer that is providing peer support services. So let's look at these each in turn. First of all, the mission to help people experience recovery. And I think it should be obvious to all of us that this is truly the most important part of delivering peer support services. And it's probably the thing that most of us think about when we think about supervision. So for example, you want to support peers in assisting other individuals in starting their own recovery journey or continuing that journey. And what does that consist of? It's going to be things like providing information on mental health and substance use disorders. For example, during supervision, you might talk about things like, so if the person you're working with has a diagnosis of schizophrenia, what are the implications that for participating in group versus individual treatment? Or is an individual's reluctance to follow through on ideas for engaging in recovery, is that a symptom of depression, or is it possibly a side effect of the medication they're on? So you need a professional to provide that kind of support around just basic information about mental health and substance use disorders. Professionals may also assist in coaching in implementing interventions like WRAP, or which is Wellness Recovery Action Plan, or relapse prevention planning. Now, when I say that professionals assist in coaching with this, I want to make clear that I have learned a lot from the peers that I have worked with about these things. And so it's not a one-way street, but whereas a peer has in-depth personal experience, typically the professional brings a broader academic training. And it's when you put those two things together that you're able to really channel the work of peer support specialists in a way that draws on their experience, but also draws on the sort of the broader research and academic background. And then navigating legal and ethical challenges. Work in the behavioral health field is filled with complicated legal and ethical issues. How far does confidentiality extend? What if a client asks you to promise not to tell something before they tell you? What about dual relationships? And the list goes on. And I've spent a good bit of my career providing consultation around legal and ethical issues for people, not only peer support people, but professionals and agencies and so on. But that's a critical part that supervision will need to address. And then finally, the management of risk situations. We all know that people with behavioral health conditions can sometimes pose risk to themselves. Sometimes they pose risk to other people, and often they are vulnerable to being at risk from the actions of others. And when you're a peer support specialist working in those contexts, you may need assistance in knowing what resources are there for protection of people, or how to assist in navigating those kinds of risk situations. The second context I want to talk about is a corporate or agency goals. You have to, all of us who work within any kind of organization, whether it's Molina like I do, or if you work for a community mental health center, or if you work for a rehab facility, wherever you are, there are goals that are related to that organization. And those may be goals around needing to do a certain amount of work. There may be productivity expectations. There may be revenue generation expectations. There may be expectations around the way people account for their time. And a supervisor has to be aware of those and help their staff person succeed with those kinds of expectations. You know, when I was working for the Bluegrass Regional Mental Health Board, now known as New Vista, which is, I retired from there, gosh, 7 years ago. It's hard for me to believe it's been that long, but at any rate, I worked there. And, you know, people say, well, you're a community mental health center, you ought to just do whatever people need. But, you know, we had to have certain revenue to keep the lights on, to keep buildings open, to pay staff salaries and so on. You can't just go out and do good just out of the goodness of your heart. You know, I guess you can, as long as you don't want to eat. But if you know, so clarifying those expectations and how they are related to your overall work. And then a supervisor has responsibility to give feedback on a person's job. You know, there's things that all of us do well. There are places that all of us can improve. And it's a supervisor's job to help people navigate the business environment that they're in a way that enables them to get feedback and make whatever adjustments are needed. Providing resources for success within the corporate world, that may be share, or agency world, that may be sharing policies, it may be providing training, whatever it is to help people get ahead. And then translating corporate or agency goals into specific job duties. Peers need to understand, and it's the role of the supervisor to help translate that. Why is what you do, how is what you do related to the overall success of not just the individuals you work with, but how does that relate to the overall success of the organization that you work for? And that's a role of a supervisor. And finally, supervision involves supporting peers in their personal recovery journey. Now, it's a very interesting thing when you are a peer support specialist. You have that job because you have been willing to say, I have lived experience with mental illness. I have lived experience with substance use. The reality is that there are many people in the workplace who have experience with mental illness and substance use they may not be forthcoming about. And last year we did a series of training for our staff around basic mental health competency. This was staff across our healthcare services department. And so, you know, we were talking about what is a mental illness, how do you recognize substance use, what resources are available, just a general training. And it was amazing to me how many times I got called, not by our peer support staff, but by other people in the organization saying, you know, this is an area in which I need connected to help. And so in talking about this, I don't want to make it sound like the only people in the workplace who have these issues are people who have been willing to come forward and say, I want to use this experience in a way that helps other people. Because there are lots of people in the workplace who struggle or live with these issues. But given that people have self-identified their experience in life, then supervision has a responsibility to support people in their own recovery journey. And let me just talk about some things that are important to keep in mind as a supervisor. First of all, it's important to discuss personal reactions to work experiences. What kinds of experiences occur within the workplace that peers may need help processing? Well, some of that may be the vicarious trauma that they experience with working with people who suffer the effects of stigma or who suffer the effects of interpersonal violence or other ways in which their lives are troubled or unsafe or painful. And when you do that work day after day after day, it can wear you down. And it's important that people have support in knowing how to manage that. Sometimes those personal reactions involve over-identification. And this is something that occurs for anybody who works in the mental health field. What I mean by that is you're working with someone and there's some aspect of their story that is somewhat like your story. And so you start thinking, this person is just like me. And maybe they're like you in some ways, but in other ways, they're not like you. They're not going to have the very same trajectory of life that you have had. And a supervisor can help people sort out, let's look at how your experience is helpful here, but maybe how your experience also does not apply to this individual as well. We have to look at every person individually. Another way in which personal reactions and work experience can be processed by a supervisor is that sometimes when you're working in an environment where people are experiencing things that you have experienced, it can be a trigger for past non-productive behaviors. And so sometimes if, for example, if you have had to work at your recovery from a substance use disorder, hearing somebody talk to you about how much fun they had while they were out partying may be something that you have to say, no, I have to stop and think about this. That is not where I want to go with my life. And a supervisor needs to be there to support and also help people say, how are you doing with all of this? And then the fourth thing I want to say about work experiences is that unfortunately, sometimes peers encounter stigma within the workplace, not from the people they're working with, their clients, but from their coworkers. And a peer support supervisor needs to be prepared to advocate for and to address that when it occurs. Another thing that should happen in supervision that addresses the peer's personal recovery journey is that the supervisor has a responsibility to monitor the well-being and encourage self-care. You know, it's really easy in the United States to get into a mindset that we need to be working all the time. Or the people that we work with have such overwhelming need that we feel like we have to be responding all the time to other people. And that is not good for any of us for our mental health. But when you have experienced something good in your life, you may feel like you just have to work all the time to help other people. And you really have to step back sometimes. And a supervisor can say, what are you doing to take care of yourself? What are you doing to monitor your own well-being? I read a book a few years ago about someone who worked with gangs in LA, and he was very effective in his work, and he helped prevent, you know, people from killing each other. But he said there got to be a point where people were waking him up at all hours of the night to, you know, like, oh, there's going to be a fight, we need you to come. And he was a Catholic priest who was working on the streets in LA. And he said he finally got to the point where, I think I'm not Catholic, so I may not have this right, but he got to a point where he heard that Pope John Paul II had said, Lord, I've worked all day as hard as I can, but I'm tired and I'm going to bed. And, you know, there is a time for all of us that we have to say, I've done what I can, and now I need to spend time with people who feed me, who fill me up, so that I've got something to give. You can't just give all the time. And then the third thing is to advocate for peers being included as full team members. There are two things that peers bring to organizations that we need to be really sure that we protect. And one is that they have a vital role in bringing services to people. And that's what we think about a lot of time with peer support. But the other thing that peers do, they are a part of the organization, and they can give feedback to the organization about whether or not their processes are friendly, are welcoming, are supportive of people who are coming for assistance. And I had an experience this past week where I was just so mindful of this. At Passport, we have a member who has had multiple hospitalizations, roughly about one a week, psychiatric hospitalizations since January. And we were having a case conference about a month and a half ago, and I said, I think we should get a peer involved. And Chad, who's here with me and is going to speak in a little bit, got involved. And we had another case conference this week, and the case manager said, in essence, and this member has not been hospitalized for a month now. And that's really great. And the case manager said, in essence, I think I finally got through to him. And I felt like I needed, as somebody in a supervisory position, to speak up and say, well, it's great what you did, but what changed is we had a peer get involved. And we have to recognize the value that peers bring to our whole system of care. And unfortunately, that doesn't always happen. And it's a supervisor's role to make sure that peers have a seat at the table, that they're respected, and that they are valued for what they bring to the organization. Another way that comes out is I was in a statewide meeting recently where there were a number of professionals, a number of advocates, and there were also some peers. And there was some a little disagreement, fussing and arguing and that sort of thing. And two of the professionals in the room kept saying, well, I'm sure that that wasn't Chad, but I'm just going to use Chad's name. I'm sure Chad would agree with me when I say this. And then the other person would say, well, I'm sure Chad would agree with this, but they weren't letting the peer speak. They were saying, I'm going to tell you what the peer thinks. And I was not in a position, it wasn't a meeting where I was welcome to speak up, but I was very frustrated by that, because if the peer has an opinion about the issue, they should be able to voice their opinion, not have somebody else sort of say, well, here's my opinion, and that's what the peer thinks too. That's just kind of pulling somebody in from the side. So the supervisor's role is really critical at advocating for and supporting the peer as a full member of the team. So let me check how I'm doing on time here. Oh, I'm just about where I'm supposed to be, which is really good. So I want to tell you how I structure this. I'm sure there's other ways, but when I do supervision, I like to start with about 5 minutes of personal check-in. How are you doing? Anything going on in your life? This is not heavy. It's not like, well, so how are you really? That's not what I'm doing. I just like to check and say, everything's going okay, anything happening. And then we're going to spend 15 to 20 minutes on the actual peer work that a person's doing. Let's talk about your cases, anything challenging, anything we need to talk about. And then around 5 minutes on organizational issues. Now, it doesn't, I'm not rigid about this. And there's weeks when you have to do more on organizational issues. And there's weeks that maybe you spend all the time talking about one case, or, and some weeks when something's really heavy, maybe you spend the time talking about what's happening in the peer's life and how that's affecting their work. The supervisor is not a therapist. I don't mean to say that, but just that somebody who needs to be aware and help provide support for the person in their experience of working within the very demanding world of behavioral health. And I'm going to very quickly touch on some special topics that should always be not a topic that you talk about every week, but should be things that people are constantly, a supervisor is constantly thinking about. So one of those things is stigma. Stigma is the idea that because a person has a mental illness or a substance use disorder, that they somehow are less worthy or do not bring as much value as another person. And that is sometimes revealed in very subtle ways that discounts. It can be something like, just a peer expressing an opinion and somebody just kind of saying, okay, and moving on. It can be expressed by people coming into a meeting and making derogatory comments about people who have a mental illness or a substance use disorder, when somebody sitting at the table has publicly said, I am living with this condition. And supervisors need to be aware of that, both in terms of the broader organization, but also in helping the peer know how to navigate that when they encounter it. And of course, stigma is something that is a reality in the lives of our clients as well. And we have to help peers know how to help their clients address that. I want tokenism. Tokenism is the idea of, yeah, we're really proud of the fact that we have a peer on our team, but we don't really expect them to be fully functional within the, have a real role. And it's like I was talking to you about that meeting where people kept saying, well, this is what I think, and I'm sure the peer would agree with me, but they don't really want the peer to have a voice. And it's important that supervisors address that when they see it. And then there's diversity competence. All of us share a humanity, but the way that humanity plays out and who we are as individuals is often different. And it may be a difference in terms of our life experience. It may be racial or ethnic background. It may be religious or sexual or gender identity. Lots of ways that people can be different. And everybody in this room is different from me in some form or fashion. And all of us are different from each other. And we need to be aware of those things and help people as they encounter differences to know how to navigate them. One of our peer support specialists who's not here with us today is a young woman named Hope Johnson. And Hope is really good at helping people with developing coping skills. And we had a recent referral for peer support services of a middle-aged woman, someone who was, I don't know, 45 or 50, somewhere in that age range. And I thought Hope was the right person to help with this referral. But before she contacted the woman, I said, we need to talk about how your age might be perceived by this person and how you're going to approach her. And it will be different from the way you approach a youth that you would talk to. And so it's diversity competence is something that every supervisor ought to keep in mind. And then we want to talk about, and I'm just going to touch on these, trauma-informed care and person-centered care. I know you've heard about those, but that's also something that a supervisor needs to always have in mind as they're working. Now, the real experts who are here about supervision are people who've lived with supervision. And so I'm going to ask our two peers, first Chad and then Tammy, to come up and give you their perspective on what makes for good supervision or anything else that they want to share with you about that. Chad? And I'm going to tell you all before we start here, we know we're on a time frame. I've tried to stick to mine. I told Chad and Tammy I'm going to make sure they stick to theirs.
Right, absolutely. Thank each and every one of you, for being here today. My name's Chad Cordial. I'm a peer support specialist with Passport by Molina Healthcare. I'm grateful to be here today to speak to each and one ever. And I just want to say I'm proud of each and every one of you for the work you do and what you do for the community around here. I'm going to touch a little bit on what we look for in supervision as a peer support specialist. I didn't talk to Dr. Hanna, but he spoke on a few things I was going to already speak about. But one thing is resourceful. If you have a supervisor that is resourceful to our job, as a peer support specialist, if we get in a crisis call, or if we get in a situation, where we need their help, if we call on that supervisor or supervision, if they're quick to respond and know exactly where to go, that means a lot, to me as a peer support, because if they stumble, I feel like I stumble, and if those resources is, and they, it's like a car salesman, like knowing its product knowledge, if they know the ins and outs of this job as a supervisor, it's going to help everybody as a team, as a one, to get what that member needs as quick as possible and as fast as possible. It also, like Dr. Hanna said, as being a peer support specialist, we got to think about our own self-care every day. That's something, living as, when I first got into peer support, Dr. Hanna, was my supervisor, and was talking about the RAP plan, and I was just learning about, the RAP plan, and I said, wow, that's really interesting. I said, because you just made me realize I live one every day, but I didn't realize it until you just brought that to my attention. I got to make sure I get up every morning. I got to, do certain things, it's just something I've come up with my own. So, as a supervisor, with those resources, having them in line, in play for every scenario that comes up to us, because each member is going to have a different a different story, a different, something that they need help with. So if they have the answers for it quick, available, that means a lot to me. And also, being able to talk to a supervisor as a team member and work as a team and not as working as just like a supervisor and an employee. If you go to your supervisor and you say, hey, I have, so-and-so member with this, and you get their ideas, but like Dr. Hanna was saying, I get that feeling of he's going to work with me because he knows, he knows in his mind and his heart, I've been there. He's going to use my resources. He's going to use his resources. He's going to use the knowing of, hey, he's been there before with, the same thing. And once you get those two working together, it's a great thing because things start happening for the member. And you see resources start popping up, availability for stuff, and just, then things start happening. And then we get to a spot to where we see people doing better. And then, and that's what our main goal is, to help each and every member get to, doing better every day. And another thing is, as a peer support specialist, I know a lot of us has had supervisors you do, and other jobs or whatever it may be, but you might do something, do it really well, and they just, okay, here's the next one, or okay, here's this one, or, if a supervisor, and I'm not looking for a pat on the back, but if I feel appreciative of what I do as a peer support and get the appreciation from a supervisor, and I've been blessed and with two good supervisors, they've taught me so much. But when you feel appreciative, it just makes you want to dig and dive and try harder and work harder and just take, and do everything, because if you don't feel appreciative, sometimes we might, think, well, it don't matter how hard I work, it's just another, I just feel like an employee and a number, you know what I mean? So when it comes down to a supervisor having those resources, and they know that your self-care is just as important as the member, and having those resources and being able to work as a team and as a member, or not, a member, a team organization, and having that supervision lined out. So when we come up with a question, they got the answers, and that means a lot to me. So am I right on time almost?
You are right on time.
But I want to thank each and every one of you for your time, for what you do, and I'm so grateful to be here. Thank you, Dr.
Who's also one of our peer support specialists.
Hello, my name, as David said, is Tammy Hedges, and I am a peer support with Passport by Melina. I'm a little bit nervous, although I am very grateful to be here. This is my first conference. A lot of the things that I'm going to go over have already been addressed. Maybe some of them not so much. So I may reiterate. A peer supervisor is pretty much everything that Dave and Chad has said, but these are a few of the things that stood out. Sorry, I'm nervous. A few of the things that stood out to me. I've had the privilege of having David to be my supervisor, and also Miss Hall. Accessibility. The supervisor is accessible in maintaining regular supervision and appointments and providing consistent availability for crisis support. I have ran into situations to where, I've had members who need help and they need help right now. So I have never had a time to where, I've either texted David or called him, and he has never failed to be there. So to me, that is very important. Supervisor practices good time management and demonstrates respect for the importance of supervision by keeping supervision appointments and being present and accessible to peer workers. I think that pretty much explains itself. Supervisor understands the need for ongoing training. We have lived experience, but there's also a lot that we need to learn in order to be able to be of benefit to our members. And I myself am very open-minded and willing to learn and to grow in this field. I think I was in one of the workshops earlier where they was talking about, you know, how new peer supports are. So it's very important to me to be as knowledgeable about this as I possibly can. So supervisor provides ongoing education, training, coaching regarding documentation standards and data entry systems, motivational enhancement techniques, micro skills, outreach, engagement, rapport building, peer competencies, regulations, legal compliance, ethics, professional boundaries, cultural awareness, self-care, and community resources. All of those are very important. Community resources. This is one of the things I'm going to reiterate. Supervisor assists peer staff in maintaining access to community resources, directories, and facilitates the sharing of community resource information within the team. It's very important. What they stressed is that I do feel part of a team. It's not I or, you know, I am or I will. It's, you know, we will and we can. Supervisors assist peer staff in developing referral relationships with varied community resources, including Indigenous recovery support resources that are not part of the traditional health and human services system. Supervisor provides means for the development and ongoing maintenance of a resource library or directory, or access to community resource information such as computer access, notebooks, binders, and directories. Melina has been very, very good about me having everything that I need to work with and to assist our members. Strength-based, person-centered supervision, and this is one of them that he touched on. Supervisors exercise the strength-based, person-centered approach to supervision. Supervisor has the capacity to give and receive feedback, engendering mutuality and trust. Supervisor creates a safe atmosphere for all staff to give and receive feedback, facilitates self-reflection and the experience of professional growth. Supervisor utilizes a strength-based approach and can consistently give recognition and praise for competency development and successful output and outcomes with their clients. Confidentiality. Supervisor maintains appropriate confidentiality for supervision relationship and recognizes that their obligations to support peer staff, occupational self-care, and ongoing recovery while maintaining professional boundaries, and avoid acting as a therapist, a diagnostician, sorry about that, I can't pronounce it, or a sponsor. A supervisor understands their obligation to monitor and facilitate occupational care of peer staff versus the personal recovery of peer staff. Thank y'all.